Welcome once again, everyone. I hope you had a refreshing lunch break and you also had a chance to try some regional favorites. So, we are back here again with yet another interesting session. Medium as Message, Decoding Digital Narratives. This time, we are all set for a presentation and a discussion on the various media of literary narratives. This time, we have a fine blend of artists and writers working in different media who will be discussing their experiences and how literature has been affected with the advent of digitality. So, for this session, we have Professor Chandan Gowda, a professor of sociology, Azim Premji, and Professor Sekhar Mukherjee, Director, National Institute of Design, Andhra, and Miss Lavanya Lakshminarayan. She's a game designer at Play Simple Games. So, for this session, we have an interesting moderator, and I'm sure most of you are already acquainted with him. He is Romal Singh. Romal M. Singh described himself as an out and proud writer, stylist, activist, and journalist who dabbles in theater, dance, and music. He is currently the editor-in-chief, Provoke Lifestyle magazine, South India's largest circulated lifestyle magazine based out of Chennai. He is also the founder of the Queer Arts Movements and Rainbow Kitty, a public funding initiative for LGBTQIA+ community. While he actively volunteers with Solidarity Foundation, which focuses on marginalized trans communities in Bangalore, he's also a member of Forum for Gender and Sexuality with National Council for Churches in India. Apart from that, he has interestingly worked with several media establishments across the country, such as Human Rights Law Network, Delhi, Mumbai, and Mangalore, News 9 and Times of India Bangalore, Bangalore Mirror, among many others. He works with different faith organizations as well. And on a lighter note, if you read his magazine, you'll know that he has some very interesting editorials to speak about. So I would like to invite Romal on stage. Let's have a round of applause for him, please.
Okay, I'm going to invite the panelists for today's very, very interesting panel. Once we get them on stage, I request you to please give them a big round of applause. First up, we have Lavanya Lakshminarayan. Lavanya Lakshminarayan is the author of Analog, Virtual. Her writing is speculative and often dwells on humanity and its relationship with technology and magic. She is also a game designer and has built worlds and written narratives for highly successful game titles, including Zyngas in companies Farmville and Mafia Wars. I'm sure games you all are very familiar with. The games she's built have been experienced by millions of players across the world. She believes in exploring narratives across platforms and in creating immersive experiences regardless of their form. She has received an honorable mention for her writing from the A.C. Bose Grant for South Asian Literature, awarded by the Speculative Literature Foundation in the US. Her award-winning stories have appeared in the anthology A Flash of Silver Green, in the Indian Quarterly, and in First Post. Her writing will soon be featured in an upcoming Graphic India anthology entitled Third Eye. She currently works at Play Simple Games, a gaming studio based in Bangalore. When she isn't writing, building toy robots, or traveling the world, she enjoys a strong cup of coffee and playing the piano. A big round of applause for Lavanya, please. Next up, we have Sekhar Mukherjee, a design educator, animation film designer, graphic novelist, festival director, who took charge as director of NID Andhra Pradesh, India, set up by the DPIIT, or the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade, under the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, Government of India, in 2018. His aim is to build a universal, multidisciplinary experimental design school of relevance. He served as a senior faculty of communication during his alma mater, NID, the National Institute of Design, Ahmedabad, from 2002 to 2017 December. He studied Masters Animation Film Design from 1992 to 1995 at NID. He's from Kolkata and started his career as a newspaper cartoonist, illustrator, and later moved on to being an infographics artist. He worked in various fields of communication, design, both in print, screen, and web media for 8 years. In 2002, he joined his alma mater. For 12 years, he headed the department, which brought many student accolades and awards under his mentorship. He is the artistic director of Chitrakatha, a biannual international student Student Festival of Design Stories since 2007. In 2009 and 2017, he received the Best Animation Teacher Award from CNBC TV 18 and the Indian animation industry. He was an active member of NID's international program NID Film Club Chairman and was instrumental to bringing numerous international collaborations and events to expose the students of design for a wider perspective of the world. He's also an editorial team member of 123 Animation, an interdisciplinary journal published by Sage UK, and long-form graphic anthology by HarperCollins India. He loves to draw and tell stories with subversions. His religion is humanism, and blood group is B positive. A big round of applause, please. Next up, and the last panelist for this panel, we have Chandan Gowda. Chandan Gowda is a professor of sociology from Azim Premji University. Chandan Gowda's research interests include social theory, Indian normative traditions, caste, and Kannada literature and cinema. In addition to his academic publications, he has written for newspapers and published translations of Kannada fiction and non-fiction in English. Before moving to APU, he was an associate professor of sociology at the Center for the Study of Social Exclusion, National Law School of India, Bengaluru between 2008 and 2011. Professor Chandan Gowda of Azim Premji University is known for his contributions to Kannada literature and cinema. He has translated Bara, a novella by U.R. Ananthamurthy, and edited The Post Office of Abachuru by K.P. Purnachandra Tejasvi, along with his numerous academic publications. He writes a weekly column on culture and politics in Bangalore Mirror. He is a PhD in sociology from the University of Michigan, and his latest publications, one due for release tomorrow, A Life in the World, U.R. Ananthamurthy in Conversation with Chandan Gowda by HarperCollins. This is incidentally being released tomorrow at the Bangalore Literature Festival. So while he's here today, tomorrow he's at another literature festival. And also, he has edited The Way I See It, a Gauri Lankesh reader, and Theatres of Democracy, selected essays of Shiv Vishwanath. He's presently completing a book on the cultural history of economic development in Old Mysore. A big round of applause. Okay, so good afternoon, and we'll jump right into the panel. We've been given this task of talking about something that is really hard to talk about in 2 hours. And so we're going to try and be kind of specific about the areas that we're going to be talking about today. Medium as a message, decoding digital narratives. Let's begin with the reality of the situation where we're decoding digital narratives that are constantly evolving every second. We don't live in a world where there is one singular narrative in the digital world. There are digital narratives being created even as we speak in a multitude of mediums, and therefore it is very tough for us to decode what these digital narratives are. But we're going to try and attempt to do that. And to help me do that today are three brilliant people that will be representing not necessarily very different opinions on a spectrum, but rather very, let's say if this is a one large spectrum, they represent three very proper points. So first I have Lavanya Lakshminarayan, and Lavanya, as I introduced, works a lot with games and is also a writer herself. Lavanya comes from a space of being taught her art and craft from traditional mediums, but she's kind of moved on to the digital narrative, and she's moved on to the digital medium. But because she comes from a traditional space, she's fully aware of the kind of problems and the kind of issues that can crop up when you are in, in a largely digitized world. And I won't talk a lot about that. I'll let her do that. Then we have Sekhar Mukherjee, Professor Sekhar Mukherjee, who is going to be celebrating digitized narratives, because Professor comes from a space of animation, a space of design, where digital narratives have actually helped create a much more diverse world in many ways. And therefore, the kind of standpoint he will be taking is more of a celebratory nature about how digitized narratives, using these digital mediums can not necessarily only be a bad thing, but could also be a great thing. As someone very wonderfully noted, that we live in a world today where anyone can be a creator. 20 years ago, that was not the case. Anyone in this audience today can be a content creator. You don't have to think twice. You don't need to get permission from anyone. You can just go out there and create whatever content you want. The amount of watchdogs and the amount of people who limit this access to creating content has completely almost disappeared from the world around us. So with that kind of a celebratory nature, we've got Professor Sekhar Mukherjee taking that standpoint. And then we have Professor Chandan Gowda, who is going to be speaking more as a social scientist, but also coming from the background of someone who understood traditional media and traditional mediums, and looking at how things have changed in this new world, which is very, very largely digitized. So I think we're going to be looking at anxieties. We're going to be looking at things like ethics. We're going to be looking at how and maybe I'm putting words into his mouth, but what I'm assuming a large part of the conversation is going to be about is there's so many mediums available to us. Everyone has access to this information, but who gets to decide who are the opinion makers? Who gets to decide who is the creator? Who gets to decide whether the kind of thing that's been presented through these digital mediums are worthy of the kind of space that they're being given, or the kind of attention that they are being given? Because let's realize we live in a world of TikTok and Snapchat. I mean, I don't think we've ever had a generation that was absolutely oblivious to the kind of repercussions of putting things out there. Like, I don't know how many of you all know what Snapchat is? Okay, good, I'm happy. That's quite a huge thing. So Snapchat is an app that allows you to put up stories, messages, information, and it disappears in 24 hours. And so you're not left responsible for anything that you put up there, which is something that changed the way people look at media for a very, very long time. For a long time, you kind of had to be responsible for the kind of things you put out, but Snapchat kind of changed that game completely. And so today, a lot of young people do not understand responsibility when it comes to creating messages. And so Snapchat kind of redefined that for us. Also TikTok, where you have a whole generation today that believes it is absolutely okay to, build a whole bunch of followers based completely on you imitating someone else, because it's not your song or your music or any of those things. You're only imitating someone else, or you're just, humming along to someone else's song, but you are considered a talent. And that kind of changed the whole perspective of what an artist can even be. So in a world where mediums and messages are constantly being redefined, it's very important for us to have a discussion like this. So now I'm going to shut up and I'm going to let the panelists talk. So I'd like you to each contextualize not necessarily the stand you're taking, but at least where you come from. And after that, we'll have a small little presentation from Professor Sekhar Mukherjee, and then we'll go into the rest of the panel.
Thank you so much, Romal. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Romal rightly pointed out, I am a traditionalist as far as a lot of my creation goes. I am a traditional writer. I prefer writing long-form content, publishing it physically, on paper, which is, there's no real necessity to do that in today's day and age, but that is the school in which I have been trained. Having said that, I believe that the opportunity presented in the digital space to really redefine what constitutes the form of a narrative is quite amazing right now, right? You are pushing the boundaries of what constitutes a story, perhaps even defining it as an experience. Now, I'm a game designer and a game writer, and what this means is that I build very immersive 360-degree experiences for people to hopefully enjoy. And I take storytelling out of simple textual form and sort of present it using animation, using an entire flow of experience, right? And all of that contributes to what builds a narrative in a game. And in this regard, I feel like digitization is really powerful because it pushes the evolution of what constitutes storytelling and narrative. We have the scope to layer storytelling and narrative across any emerging technology in the world today. As Romal pointed out in my introduction, I've built toy robots and written narratives over toy robots, right? I've worked in cryptocurrency, the whole Bitcoin space, building narratives to try and make people familiar with it. So it can bridge the gap between what is emerging technologically and a regular person on the street through the simple and very traditional nature of storytelling, except adapted, right? Having said that, this is a double-edged sword, as we've been talking about. There is a need for checks and measures, and these don't always exist. So I am very wary of creating for the digital space, but I do think that it future-proofs the very act of storytelling, and that's where I come from.
Okay, just to quick look back, I came from a very much downtown of Calcutta, and I was never interested in school, and I failed miserably in many subjects, somehow managed. But I got fascinated with, and I wish always that if I can read through comics, biology, history, mathematics, and everything through comics. And that kind of journey like took me into obsessed with comics and cartoon and humor drawing, funny art, and etc. etc. And of course, you know that I was the last bencher. And in retrospect, today in this journey with design education, dealing with some of the amazing talents, those who are like me, didn't really perform well in their text-heavy academics, but they are doing wonders into performance. Be a visual artist, be an audio artist, everybody's an artist. So taking from your take on that, I believe digital accessibility and internet boom definitely gave us that kind of courage and empowerment that what we started unlocking, that every child is a born artist. It's only school who killed them, quoting Picasso. And I think that is why after working in industry, I went back, because the industry also had its own stereotyping. Our attitude towards creativity is being killed completely in a confined classroom situation for quite some time. And that time is really fading. And the challenges are coming because YouTube is the university. Then what is the role of the institute? And I think that in institute's role today, what we look at is working together. Because in design school, when I went in National Institute of Design as a student, not because I got the highest marks in my subject, but my portfolio of crooked line drawings, but some crazy thoughts about streets of Calcutta gave me a seat there. I earned it. And I think that's why I went back, because I feel that we need this kind of education time and again, where our faculty used to say that when you study, you stand and do things. When you take rest, you sit back. And that's beautiful. And today it's related to, like in Hyderabad, if you go to IKEA, you really start conversing with the product. And then you realize, here we have our Japanese friend, that even object has life. Because in National Institute of Design, we got a master furniture designer, George Nakashima, who shifted to America during the fear of Holocaust in Japan after the World War. And then came back to India because in search of Aravinda's philosophy, as well as bringing design into it. But the knowledge was isolated. It was all kind of not accessible, and there is always this kind of rules and regulation which comes and which never give us idea that how I can get empowered. And today, I think these are all falling apart, and I think I'm very excited about it. And now new role, yes, indeed, as a director of a new design school, I'm bringing both worlds together. At least I'm trying to bring the best practice of the past and relevance of today. And everywhere, everybody is a performer. So this is my take. Yeah, thank you.
15 years ago, I met someone, a funder. Her passion was to ensure that every Indian university had JSTOR. And she wanted to fund every university to have a JSTOR access. And she felt she was doing an extraordinary service to the universities. And I found myself completely not sharing her enthusiasm. And I wondered why. I mean, it's not, all that difficult to guess why. Because it's, those of you who, everyone knows what JSTOR is. It's a huge electronic journals database for which you pay an annual subscription of a very high fee. Even without the JSTOR, there's already great anxiety in us, and I speak for many of us in the audience here who have actually thought about this at length, about the inequities in how social thought comes to be thought about in the world. And the West has taken a lead in this. And even when we do Indian iterations of social science, we realize how tough it is to really arrive at our own modes of thinking when we are so deeply beholden to those frameworks. And this, I felt, was just amplifying that predicament so much more. This was, of course, just to lay things a bit starkly. I'm not against JSTOR or reading journals from there. But it is just to point to the fact that digitization, the way in which it is welcomed as another form of literacy, another source of creativity, somehow doesn't appear to be just that. Because it seems to be so backed by the international market system and the political system, the anxieties about what it might do in relation to non-digital ways of knowing and thinking and doing is very real. And there's no sign of it slowing down. On the contrary, we know the trends. We know how the market has colonized the digital space. We know how certain kind of political ideologies have colonized the digital space because some things can't be said, they're taken off instantly, etc. So these are the concerns that I have. Can you have a non-violent digital technology? I mean, this is not about spurning it or saying no to it, but how do you, make space for it in ways that it doesn't readjust things drastically? I mean, even in writing emerged as a technology, and then you have the printing industry that took it forward. The oral cultures, suffered a huge defeat. And it's not just about conquest and defeat. It's really about displacing modes of knowing that may really be impossible to retrieve. And in the interest of pluralism and different ways of understanding the world and allowing different ways of understanding to exist in the world, I would be extremely circumspect about what digital technology is doing in our midst today. So it's in this.
Before we get into the crux of the conversation, I'm going to request Professor Sekhar Mukherjee to make a small presentation. It's around 8 minutes. He'll just kind of give you a perspective of the kind of work he does. And I think keeping that in context, we can then carry the conversation forward. Professor.
Okay, just quickly move on. As an animator, I promise that I won't take more than 8 minutes. We calculate time in frames. Apart from my regular job, shaping up the institute, spending time with students, dealing with education, administration, because National Institute of Design is a very unique unsung design school, which is quite experimental, and today's world is perfectly matching with. And definitely what I mean by that, it's like best practice of the past and relevance of today. And so along with that, four of our friends, we started this initiative called Long Form Comics Magazine. The whole idea is like 4 of us came from different background. One is mathematician, one is a professor of English, and I am the cartoonist, and then another friend is a documentary filmmaker. And we felt the same, that every subject, if can be told, every individual can tell their stories through comics. So that's how it started. And this is the question comes that today we are living in Pangaea, and this is one of my residency comics I did in part of artist residency in Zurich. And I was dealing with my canvas that 2 worlds, 2 architecture, 2 different time, but it's always the passage of time through human beings around. And they travel and they share and they tell their stories, a new story born out of it. So this paradox become the kick. It is also the different folks, those who are telling stories from the place they belong to. The context also become very important. And that is what we bring in our design education. That context, if you don't know your context, you can't tell your stories. Whether it's a story of mathematics or poetry or story of a picture. And on that line, we moved on and we said that let's come together and slice some time out from here. And then we discussed almost for 3 years before we get a buyer, where HarperCollins came on board and saying that they like to publish our stories. And our stories is not only our stories, the stories of different people. We started reaching out, the students, their friends, homemakers, shopkeepers, and saying, you like to do a comics with your bad drawing, you have some stories to tell which is not reaching out, it's not becoming a bestseller, please give it to us. And that's how we collected. And then Volume 1 got published. Our idea is that we'll publish 1 book once in 2 years, because it takes that much of time. So the Volume 1, along with that, we started another comics festival with Jadavpur University in Calcutta called Dogs, and it means doing graphic stories. And there, different departments are coming together and collaborating, and they're saying that it can be a textbook. The people like us, those who can't read through the heavy text, can very well remember the picture. And that's how our journey began. This is 4 of us, and it's not narcissism, it's just to give an introduction of the long form. And our contributors of the Volume 1 was the people across the world. There are some of the good names from France and Iran and Korea and Bhutan. And along with that, We also did a tribute to Satyajit Ray's visual documentation of one of his children film called Goping and Bagabhain, which was uniquely textbook for any film or design students to study through that, how important it is to do research, visual research, and pre-production study before you go and make a classic films. And then we have Indian contributors contributed there. They are our students, alumni, graduates, professors, and individuals. And that resulted into a unique range of stories in a volume 1. This is a story from Kerala, which talks about the breast tax. This is a story about the food fetish, how food is a symbol of obnoxious human culture of different class. This was my story. It's a tribute to a Guanese lady who was fighting against all odds in Ahmedabad to sell non-veg food. You know, sometimes this kind of stories also we hear. Then different stories continue here. This is a Korean girl who contributed a story of their anxiety of North Korea and South Korea. The same Korea is divided and still living in two different time, two different world. This is Venkat Shyam, a gone friend of mine. First time he gave this story, which is deconstructed, and single painting is breakdown into a comics. So become a art appreciation of Gond art. So this is something which I just wanted to share, that this has become possible because of the digital access, because of the internet, because of many way we are reaching out people. We are doing Skype, we are doing Snapchat, we are doing WhatsApp, we are transferring heavy files in no time. And on this note, this gives me an excitement and high. And before I end, this small clip I like to show you is a result of how different communities we are bringing together and empowering them with the digital affordability. One of such is from my design festival called Chitragatha, which we did. This is an edition of this edition was 2017 edition, where we worked with a group of Mehendi artists, those who work with Self-Employed Women's Association, m.i.l.a.p, a fantastic organization, largest women's cooperative, and their marginalized voice. So we worked with them, gave them the idea of sequential art, gave them the idea of the After Effects and Photoshop and scanner, and they used their mehendi as their device and started telling their stories, their struggle, their dream, that and a feminist tale which remains unsung. And then we exhibited, projected, and distributed through different festival circuit. So, which brought them to certain amount grants. So some of these girls got a chance to go and study, or send their brother or sister to the school to get educated. So this is one documentary animation I want to show. The entire thing is done with mehendi and digital empowerment of After Effects, and certain other software is giving life as an animation film.
મારું નામ સાધ્યા વિનુભાઈ છે. હું 15 વર્ષની છું. હું લખી અને વાંચી શકું છું. મારા કુટુંબમાં 7 સભ્યો છે. માતા, પિતા, 3 બહેનો, 1 ભાઈ અને હું પોતે. મારા પપ્પા રૂપિયા 4000ના પગારમાં દ્વાર રક્ષકની નોકરી કરે છે એક શોપિંગ મોલમાં. મારા મમ્મી બંગલાના કામ કરે છે. હું શિક્ષક બનવા માગું છું, પણ આગળ ભણી નથી શકતી, કારણ કે મારે મારા ભાઈ બહેનનું ધ્યાન રાખવાનું હોય છે અને મારી શાળા બાજુના વિસ્તારમાં છે. તો મારું કુટુંબ મને ત્યાં એકલી જવાની મંજૂરી આપતું નથી. અત્યારે હું સિલાઈકામ શીખી રહી છું. જ્યારે હું સંપૂર્ણ રીતે સિલાઈકામ શીખી લઈશ, પછી હું ડ્રેસને બનાવીશ અને વેચીશ. મારી જાતે રૂપિયા કમાઈશ. જ્યારે મને મોકો મળે ત્યારે હું મારા ભાઈની ચોપડીઓ વાંચું છું. મને આશા છે કે મને ભણવા મળશે અને હું મારા સપના સાકાર કરીશ.
So one of the last frame, that girl wanted to buy cosmetics and dress herself up. So she used the same mehendis to show a symbolic representation that she likes to beautify herself. You know, this become quite an example, and we keep on doing it through our education. And last from here, before I go back to the chair and we can continue, is every edition of this festival, we encourage our students to do a promo. So before I show you the promo, a very tiny little 1 minute promo, the group of students, they couldn't pay their rent to their house owners. And it was an old house, and then they discussed with me, what can we do? I told them that you do something with the house, that old house, and tell them that you'll decorate your house, their landlord's house, and in return, you can stay for 2 more months without paying rent. So they painted their house, and in that process, they did an animation promo of the painting process. So how they did it, I'll just show you. And it is also the celebration of 10 years of our design festival. When these students later become entrepreneurs, and they continue, become their portfolio, they show it to places and start getting different kind of jobs. This is produced in a week's time.
Tongita takita takita dongita tongita takita takita tongita tongita tagadum tagadi tagadum tagadi tagadum tagarigita tagadum tarigita.
Thank you very much. I think I stuck to the time, so. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, Professor. I think that's given us a nice, some sort of a context to the rest of the conversation that we have. We come from three very different spaces. I mean, at some point, the narrative does get entangled with each other, and I think at the end of the day, while we have three different voices here, we're trying to represent the same thing, that we are in a digitized world, increasingly digitized. There's a lot of anxiety around how do we control this kind of digital narrative? Should it be controlled? Is there a reason for it to be controlled? If we're going to control it, how are we going to control it? And why do we need to control content in that sense? Because the digital space was, heralded as something that would take away control from content. And today, those of us living in this world that is highly digitized, we often feel the need that there is some sort of a control needed. For example, I'm going to quickly ask you all, say 20 years ago, was it very often for us to get, videos of young children being beaten by their parents, something that we get every 3 days on WhatsApp today? Or animals being skinned alive, being shared on WhatsApp groups? Or a lot of these things that otherwise there was someone to control the access to this kind of information, saying that this is going to be problematic, this is going to negatively influence someone. Today, we don't have those barriers in place today, which means we are getting access to these kind of videos which are not necessarily beneficial to anyone. Or, for example, the amount of violence, lynching videos that are doing circulation all over the country. one often wonders if, even sharing that video is going to be of any use, because while yes, there's a huge population of people who might share it with absolutely good intentions, there are going to be people who are going to watch it and get some sort of a sick, watching someone else being beaten or harassed or beaten to death or whatever. So when we look at traditional media and we look at today's digital world where there is really no control, there's often this whole argument about, is this a good thing or is it a bad thing? So let's look at the positives first. I mean, before we start criticizing the world that we live in, let's look at what digitization has done personally for each of us. I think it's important for us to look at the kind of plethora of opportunities that digitization has opened in terms of narratives, in terms of opportunities, in terms of the way we look at mediums. And so let's talk about that first, and then maybe we'll get into the criticisms later on. Who would like to go first? Anyone?
Okay, so in terms of the possibilities that digital media have opened up to me personally, I've always wanted to be a writer, right? And this was my life's ambition since the age of 8. I wrote rubbish fantasy novels at 13. They were terrible. I was always so wary of entering into this space simply because the economics of being a creator are absolutely not guaranteed, right? And I will start right there and state the most obvious thing. I think because of the diversity of opportunity available to us because of digital forms of content, the economics of wanting to write makes sense right now, right? I have a day job and that guarantees that I can pay my bills. And I do it all coming from the point of view of being a writer, right? So even though my approach to it, I consider myself a very responsible creator. I vet everything I put out there, and everything I write is fiction, right? But even within the scope of absolute fiction and completely gratifying entertainment, which is what a lot of games end up being, I'm a really responsible creator. And I think using this, I guess, spectrum of opportunity comes with the weight of that responsibility, which a lot of people do tend to take seriously, but not all. And that's really, we'll get to the problems later, but I think the opportunity exists if one can be self-critical enough to really think of how they're using the digital space to express themselves.
Yeah, from my position, what I'm really enjoying, I'll share a few of the quick things which perhaps 10, 15 years back, there are a lot more effort and struggle one has to go through. Since I'm with design education, and also because of personal excitement doing this alternative year festival, design festival, or even running the program, sometimes I wish you get some international experts or some experts from other part of India, because it's not easy to travel from one corner to another corner. Many are cases that either budget become a constraint, then you can call someone, or even travel time takes so long, someone says that I'm interested but I might not be able to come because 2 days goes completely haywire. So Skype became a fantastic medium where we started doing collaborative classrooms, collaborative projects, and also the file transfer system, which is giving us much more confident that much more heavier files are getting transferred, and we are producing stuff, even films and other stuff also we are producing in collaboration, and students are getting experts input from the schools what we are collaborated with across the world, which was not possible maybe even 10, 15 years back. Secondly, personally, even I got a chance like yours, got a chance to post my stuff through Instagram, and I get my communication and connections and my negotiations. And that resulted into a couple of time occasional print project, which I also love to do for children illustration, where you find an author and publisher saying, we want to publish this kind of story, this kind of drawing style. So in contrast, again, I'm recalling in the regular stereotyped industry will say, no, this is popular, so if you can do it, we'll publish. So those days are gone. And those days will disappear. And whether we like it or not, it's like post boxes. Yeah, it's like post boxes looks nice. I mean, it's romantic, but You can't start a movement saying save the post boxes. Yes, there are movements, people are writing letters, they're fantastic, but at the same time we have to embrace. So I always feel that it's travel between two times, it's, and that's why design education, I feel what we encourage, that don't forget the past, don't forget the fundamentals, don't forget your grandparents, document them and use the digital platform to tell their stories to the world. So this is how we look at it. Yeah.
If I may just add to what Professor Mukherjee has said, right, in terms of only those things which are popular being produced over and over again, I think digitization really opens it up to very subcultural forms of content being put out there. When we were kids, for example, the only animated movies we would watch were Disney and Pixar, right? And now there is so much more content that we have access to, so we can see so many different worldviews if we just choose to go onto YouTube and watch movies there. Similarly with writing, I write speculative fiction, and fantasy and science fiction traditionally is not thought to do very well in certain markets. But there are so many wonderful writers who are actually putting up their long form content, really well thought through, well researched stuff, self-publishing on Amazon. And as I said earlier, because they're being responsible creators, it really shines through, even though it hasn't gone through that traditional vetted by several gatekeepers in the publishing process, right? So I think that's definitely a positive.
Just in terms of academic, the advantages are obvious. In the sense, you can access things quickly and listen to lectures you may not have been able to listen to in the past. Like this discussion will go online. Visits to archives sometimes have, in some cases have become redundant because the whole thing is digitized. And these are very serious advantages. If you're a researcher, this is the ease about which no one can complain, about finding a document easily, etc. But this has a flip side. Research can become too easy, in the sense that you do a keyword search and you feel that a proper survey has been done. That has a huge bearing on what you end up saying. You haven't struggled through the essay to find a para of relevance. You've actually found it straight away, and this is, I think it pushes you towards these sorts of things, especially when there's the pressure to finish something quickly, so all around. But would you call this decentralization of knowledge is something to ask? I mean, it's important. I mean, one isn't complaining that some of these things have become more easily available. There is the very real fact of open source, open access journals, etc. Having said that, would it pass muster in the yardstick of decentralization of knowledge and discussion? It wouldn't. And what would it take for it to become that is something I think we should all think about very seriously, because again, the asymmetries that used to exist prior to the digital technology's arrival have simply passed through the new technology and have morphed in ways, but the asymmetries are very solid and durable. I mean, there is some opening up. Some people are feeling free to contribute from different parts, what we call subcultural worlds, but it's a fluke thing. I mean, it's a complete fluke that you'll find a Montessori performance from Mysore being put on YouTube. But what might it take for it to become more systematically available is the question to ask. And even there, I wouldn't just say, okay, there is a utopia when everything is available to everyone in every possible form. I think the digital platform is not a neutral platform. Even as a technology, I think it orients you to the world in a certain way. It makes you think of memory in a certain way, and you're relating to time differently, and speed is definitely built into it, and all of which has a bearing on the act of the creative process. And I think the losses are not fully felt, but you sort of see it when you read, the op-eds in the Hindu used to be very different in the past. You could actually assign it in a class. I mean, I don't see so many op-eds these days like that. I think it's probably a casualty of a certain kind of instant, quick research, commentarial sort of writing, I think.
I think yes, we're in a world that is kind of being defined by instant gratification, and having so many professors here in the audience, I'm pretty sure all of you all will completely agree that every time you get theses coming in, you first see whether it's come from Wikipedia or where they've gone and taken their information from. And I think over the last 10 years, it's also easy for you to backtrack and figure out where the information has come from. You select a bit of information, put it up on the internet, and you know exactly where it's been taken from. So there are benefits, obviously, to digitization, but as Professor Chandan Gowda was saying, the question is, with all this easy access, is it necessarily a good thing? It's really tough for us to have that opinion right now, which is why I was saying that when we're saying decoding digital narratives, we're still very much in the infancy of this digitization or this world of digitization. We have no clue where it's going to go. So right now, for us to decode a narrative is really tough because the narrative is being built. But the narrative has been built enough already, and so we're going to try and talk about that. I'm just going to quickly digress and talk about how digitization has changed the way we look at the world. Like, for example, I can't have imagined an industry like the subtitling industry existing in a country like India. One of the biggest industries in Bangalore right now is the subtitling industry. And it works completely on this idea of digitization where a film is releasing on Friday, you get a high-res version of the film in a studio in Bangalore on Thursday night at 12 o'clock. The release is at 9 o'clock in the morning in the US. A bunch of 30 people sit together and subtitle the movie between 12 o'clock in the night and 4 o'clock in the morning. And then they're wetting the process because this is an official subtitle file. And then the file is laden onto the film and then it's correlated, ensure that the sync happens. All of this is happening in real time of 4 hours. An industry that could not have existed even 10 years ago. And it's minting money. So there, of course, digitization and the way we're looking at these industries has opened up a plethora of opportunities. Some of them need wetting, some of them, by their own definition, exist because of the lack of what we were calling, people who can control it. But moving away from the positives, let's also look at this position of maybe it's a negative thing. Like, for example, I'm going to give you a conversation that I was having recently with someone in Bangalore. So, The Hindu, which everyone reads, if you've noticed, the Friday review on Hindu has changed quite a bit, especially if you're looking at dance reviews. For a very long time, dance reviews in The Hindu were very archaic. You could predict how it would be written. You'd have someone writing about, so the dancer opened to a charanam, and then she danced to this particular ragam based on this talam, and then after that, this is what happened, and then she performed this, and then she went into the next bit. Today, The Hindu is not doing reviews like that anymore. They're talking about form, they're talking about presentation, they have reviewers who are referring to this piece and comparing it to someone else. Now, an older person would look at this and say, absolutely not valid because there is a form that exists and it has to be according to that. But then you have an in-between generation that actually identifies more with this kind of a review. So is it necessarily a bad thing? Is it necessarily a bad thing for us to go away from traditional ideas of what reviews are, what opinions can be created? It's still a question that I can only leave out there. There's no definite answer to it. Keeping that in mind, let's then think about the negatives. As all of you have said, there are, I think other than Professor Sekhar, both of you have spoken about a larger negative capability of this kind of access. So let's draw a focus onto what's the worst case scenario you've come across?
Okay, so I have worked at companies across scale that create digital content, so that create games, right? And we are talking about companies that have their platform on Facebook or on your iOS and Android, right? And the sheer access that these companies have to profiles and social information about every single user. Now, keep in mind, there's this whole debate that happens in big data circles about the ethics of big data. And I'm not saying these companies have had any illegal access, so to speak, like it's all above board. But it is quite staggering to know that at any given point, we can identify people's preferences and then effectively create content to completely pander to those preferences. There is such a high degree of gendered content being created because at some point, people decide, okay, we are going to create an app or a game or a feature that appeals to women in the age group 30 to 40. What are these women consuming? What kinds of content are they into? We build entire profiles and we do it. Now, it's a fascinating science, but I feel like, you know, it's fascinating within bounds, right? Does it help you create something meaningful to someone? And in a lot of cases, sheer entertainment is meaningful to people, right? Like a game like Farmville, I apologize for the spam if any of you have got it, but a game like Farmville, we've had players come up to us and say, this game helped me deal with my OCD, or it kept me calm when I was going through a really bad divorce. So something as simple and entertaining as that can have value, but think of, you know, I guess extrapolating the kind of data that we can access about people in a totally dystopian future, which is sometimes the kind I like to dwell on, we could pretty much know everything about you. And I think by and large, you know, servers around the world already know everything about everybody. It's just that they do not allow people unlimited access to this information. But all it takes is, you know, perhaps political powers lobbying or even corporations lobbying, and suddenly, would you trust a creator who is creating for you if they knew exactly what you wanted and gave you exactly what they thought you wanted? And this has always been the problem, I think, if we look back into the history of advertising and all of that. But at no point have we had such accurate information, including your search terms and your search histories and what you buy on Amazon or look at on Amazon but don't buy on Amazon, right? And I think that's really where things get terrifying.
Just before Professor Sekhar, I don't know how many people here are aware of the fact that your personal messages, your Facebook interactions, your Facebook messages, all of that, it's just one legislation away from being made public. It's literally just one legislation away from it. Most people are not aware of it. Like even your WhatsApp messages, we think it's protected, and it says that it's protected from end to end. But believe me, it's just one legislation away from it becoming public. So that's the reality that we live in today.
Yeah, I mean, it's, of course, as I said, my blood group is B positive, which is true. I mean, I feel that end of the day, I mean, it's in human nature, we always go through the old school, new school conflict, self-paradox, all these things happen. But this is something in the morning conversation with Mahesh sir about the job of a educator, a teacher. You know, the challenge is, I tell my colleagues that we are dealing with the student age group, they remain constant, but we are aging. So what will be the trick for us to keep them excited about their class? So what I see that of course they become faster, their skull cases become bigger, jaws become softer, yeah, because they're not eating food anymore, but all these things happening. But here my cartoonist trait works like flip side. Of course we can't remember the telephone number anymore. Of course I have to do a social performance reading from mobile the lyrics. Yeah, of course we are like forgetting as if I am no one, you know, like, and there are, this question comes also that design ethics, like ethical practices. So human senses, that whether is getting lost. The society is becoming a big questions because the local conversations are missing, language is missing, you know, because we are getting into smiley communications. Like again, paradox is, are we going back to the cave painting of Altamira? The smileys are being drawn and then communicating. So who are we to stop? But this is again, we bring it in the classroom scenario and we tell that you can't download watercolor app, you have to experience the watercolor. The question I was talking to Nihar about, like, you know, we are visually blinded, so we are getting sound-wise blind, because all sound we hear is a mobile ringtone, but not natural sound anymore. So how we talk about that, you know? So these dialogues perhaps is the fodder for good education initiatives to come together, and platform like this of course brings this, but the challenge is definitely we are losing and somebody else is controlling our brain. And again, subtext and subversions and design and politics, that is largely we avoid because we are largely stuck with the good things and fairy tales, and and then different perspective how we talk about it. There are issues of gender, issues of class, different conflicts, larger world, divided world, you know. So it's intoxicating. I really don't know. I'm no one to answer anything definite. I love subjectivity, and but at the end I'm always hopeful, because I feel that we all go through in younger days with our own high, and then look back and we say that, that how silly it was, so like that spirit I take, and I always have confidence in the younger generation, and I know one day they will save the world.
The surveillance is a huge problem. There are two other problems that I feel strongly about. One is the fake news phenomenon. Of course, there are legislations, etc. But I think the idea that you could actually try to lie to someone to get them to think like you. I mean, propaganda, we've known about propaganda, but this is another order of propaganda, right? In terms of you're actually corroding, sanity, if you will, or just it's kind of the political culture is being reshaped in ways, and there's zero thought towards what might come after the fact of this having been internalized in whatever way. And the other thing is, I think, a certain mainstreaming of political sort of liberalism, if you will, or normativity. The morning session talked about the arrival of binaries of the right and the left. I mean, the right binary I don't care as much, but the left binary, that's the worrisome part. I mean, how can you allow a range of thought attitudes about how to be proper in this world, how to be correct in this world, or how to live meaningfully in this world, come to be hitched to what one could fairly comfortably call a left view, and this is if you look at the network of the left thought, the metropolitan capitals of the world will unite, and including Delhi and a few other things, and the language actually becomes incidental almost. You could be talking Kannada or English, but the politically correct grammar has traveled successfully. And this is something I think one must resist, because there are other ways of doing. And I'm not saying it's a lost thing. I mean, there are lots of people who don't toe the left line, who try to arrive at insights that are, independently important and necessary for advancing, a democratic culture. But I think in this, I think anthropologists should study Twitter culture. Who's retweeting whom, when, how. I mean, forget the right tweets. I'm not interested in that. The non-right tweets. I mean, the extraordinary sameness that they seek in the person they're retweeting is alarming. And there's something wrong there. And I think it's enabled by, a steady writing, production of, which happens on a daily basis. And I worry about the closing of the left horizon, if you will.
I think very few people realize how there has been such a huge shift. For example, I don't know how many of you all follow, this is something that really shocked me a while ago. How many people follow this show called Black Mirror? It's a beautiful show that comes on Netflix. Okay, just one hand up. So Black Mirror was a show that started around 4 years ago. And I think in the season 2, which was now 3 years ago, they had an episode basically, it's a show that talks about dystopian futures, about the world in crazy senses of dystopia. And they had this one episode, this was 2015, they had an episode where they spoke about the world becoming driven by social media, where basically you have an app, and every time you interact with another human being, they rate you for the interaction that you had, whether you're good, you're bad, and you get scored according to 5 points. So it depends on how you said good morning, or what clothes you're wearing, or any of those things. So everything that you do in life is rated according to this app. When we watched the episode in 2015, it was ridiculous. All of us just laughed and we were like, oh my God, this will never happen. Today in 2019, it's already in China. In China today, there is already an app created by the government where you are rated according to the way you behave as a model Chinese citizen. So we're in a world where we're seeing media coming into reality. We're seeing dystopian features that would be considered fiction becoming reality. And that's how different the world has become. And it's alarming because, we looked at a world where most cases of literature, representation in the arts, the things that we were writing about was always about reality reflecting what we wrote and what we thought about, or these creations of narratives. Today it seems to be the other way around. And that just shows the kind of dystopia we're going into. But I love the fact that even though we have 3 different voices here, none of us really are scared of this future. We agree it's dystopic, but we're kind of hopeful. No, no. We seem relatively hopeful, which is okay. So I think my next set of questions to you all would be now, each of you come from your own different backgrounds, and you are aware of the problems that we're having. Personally, and I'm not talking as people representing your fields of expertise, but personally, what have you done to ensure that you control these situations? Like, you know how it can go out of hand and how you can actually influence someone through the games that you're playing, right? So how do you ensure that as a responsible game creator, do you control the situation? As someone who's an artist and as a designer yourself, when you are telling your students to create stuff, where do you kind of nudge them towards drawing lines control in ways saying, okay, go up to there, but then beyond there, maybe not? How do you draw those things? And as a social scientist, while you completely accept that, yes, there are benefits in this mass digitization, and you're fully aware of the problems that it could also cause, where do you then draw the lines and say, okay, this is where it stops, and beyond this, I don't think we should go any further, or this is where the controls need to be put into place? So if we could talk about that, that would be great.
Right. So starting with, particularly looking at games, right? Because I think they're most relevant to this conversational space. I think one of the biggest things that I've always done, and this is also credit to the institutions that I've managed to work at, we have an incredibly detailed system of checks and measures for everything that goes into the game. For example, a tiny little example that makes a world of a difference is that in all our games, we never used binary pronouns. They were always non-binary. So every player was referred to as they. Characters in our games were always they, simply because we didn't want to dictate the feel of the game, and polarize people, right? I think that degree of care is really the biggest thing that you can do as a creator, and that I feel quite proud of having done as a creator. In fact, a lot of the time, because these games are so dependent on popular acceptance to be successful, right? You're not creating them in an experimental setting where, the idea is to provoke, the idea is to entertain in many of these occasions. As a designer, as someone who's led design teams, we've stood by our beliefs as creators, as opposed to what the popular belief might have been. So for example, when equal rights came through in the United States of America, we actually released an entire celebration in the game around it. And we got a ton of hatred from our very conservative players. And keep in mind that at that point, they formed a significant part of our player base. But we just said, no, you know what, you might disagree with it, but this is what we believe in and this is what we stand for. And we're sorry if you have a difference of opinion, let's just agree to disagree. And we stood by that. And I think there is space to do that in spite of what the market demands of you. And there is space to be sensitive towards how to put things across to your play base.
Yeah, I mean, I'll draw the example from my experience of dealing with a student in a classroom scenario. As I said, that ours is very much applied and studio-based exercise and very mentorship approach. So there we discuss about it, like the students have to take their time, they show their ideas, their stories, the project, and in that process, I think it's a responsibility of the mentor how they give them that how much freedom and how much limit. Yeah, so not to be very preachy, but also to, and at the same time, a mentor's own practice is very important, and that actually really solve half of the problem. Like, once you show them case studies, and once you also give them the reference, because by now, even the graphic world also has very rich variety of work worldwide, like, even works like Mouse, which got Pulitzer and all these things, and then there are also undergrounds and subversions and different perspectives, different groups. So that way students really come up with, and I think in design or in the medium where we are working on in animation and comics, we have one blessing in disguise. The censorship is not there because they think it's a children's stuff, So I don't know how long, but but that pressure might come. I mean, I don't know, because your phone is listening to you. So So, but yeah, it's 1984 continuous. But, but yes, I mean, it's a responsibility lies with mentor quite a bit, yeah. And sometimes you have to win their confidence, because attention span, as I told you, that, immediately they'll forget. So often I give them an exercise to the new bunch of students that whole day they have to sit on a chair and do nothing. So, and when I come back, I say only one or two will be there, very sincerely sitting there, so. But it doesn't mean I'll scold them, but, so next day we discuss that why you couldn't sit through, and that's how the dialogue starts. Like.
Just to stick to the classroom as a place where you can put some of these convictions to work, the reading materials used. If it's a sociology class, you're not obliged to do anything outside of sociology readings, but not so in the class I teach. There's always fiction, there are films, not always Indian, but anything that you feel unsettles a certain familiar frame of thinking about a problem. Your Ananthamurthy stories, O.V. Vijayan stories, films too. And minimizing things like PowerPoints in the class, discouraging bullet pointed answers. The essay form is important, and and then there is something about the lecture, and Venkatrao was saying, well, you can do a PowerPoint as soulfully as one can do a lecture. I don't know how, I have not been able to pull it off. For me, it seems like fixing things as important for you to remember and walk out of the classroom with. And there is something about a thought movement that I feel, at least I remember enjoying when I heard lectures in the class when I was a student. And I try to hold on to that practice that might become archaic very soon, I don't know, but there's something about the lecture that I feel is important. Yeah, these are ways, and the way of course, they can't go to Wikipedia, those kinds of sources to do their work, but maximally a certain kind of, the students are, they're ready to take safe positions, and you try to encourage them to break those things, yeah.
I think Professor Chandan brought about a very important point that today, at least today when we're looking at digital narratives, there's a clear inequality because of the fact that the West was ahead of us. Even with the kind of resources you're getting, even with the kind of documentation you might be finding, a simple Google search for a single word, we're getting a lot more information from there and a lot less information from here. And so for a future, when we're talking about people, I'm not too sure how it translates into your experience, but in both your cases, I mean, you both deal with students. There's a lot less information from here in the digital world today. So, I mean, what is the probable solution right now? I mean, do we really go forward and go crazy with digitizing everything that we have in India today? Or how do we solve this problem? Because, and this is something that I think all of us would know. The moment you put in a Google search for anything, the amount of resources you get, you can count how few the resources would be from Asia, forget India. Then out of maybe 100, maybe 3 would be from Asia or India. And that is problematic, especially when we're trying to build a narrative that is very indigenous, that is very from our own roots. So what do you think is the solution? Because as we delay, the number on that side gets more. So any opinions on that? I think both. You want to have it? You could have it. Yeah.
No, this is an important question. I mean, it's not just the question of infrastructure, of having everything digitized, although I think that's important to do, no doubt. But it's about, having institutions for preparing people to do the hard work of, if you look at, again, social science textbooks in colleges that are teaching in Kannada or Telugu or Malayalam, they're likely to be, versions of textbooks that you have elsewhere. That has to change. And to change that, it takes a lot of work. And there are, again, many in the room who have thought about this. And it's easy to recognize the problem, but then to have a constructive sort of route to sort of, to leave that and to embark upon another way of inquiry is difficult, but has to be done. So I think there are many things have to happen alongside, but there are no quick ways of getting there. But because I think it takes an institutional commitment of having, and these are not mechanical exercises. At some level, someone has to feel that there's a quest to understand properly, and then you have to have a teacher who will have the patience to lead them through it. It's a longish thing, but the unease is prevalent, I think. It's an important moment, and But how we build on the unease is the next thing. And, but it has to be, but the private universities are exploding. Who has the time to take 3 years to form a syllabus? They're moving quickly, but amidst all of this, I think there's no giving up on the idea of trying to have a different social science conversation, not just among academic sort of conference venues, but being embodied in the classroom practice itself, and that has to happen. But I think there has to be also it's as a gesture of using digital technology, of just laying. I mean, not in digital technology. I think there is a certain kind of an imperialism that I can capture everything, and that impulse has to be tempered seriously, because there is a lot that you should not even get into, because even the form of recovery can't be digital. It has to be something else, because the emphasis on the visual is so heavy, and there are many forms that are non-visual, but they're important. And how do you, make space for these things alongside, while not devaluing them as lesser pursuits along this bigger pursuit? These are things to think about.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just try to be a little more serious on this line, because what we talk about, even we study humor seriously in design education. And what we do is give emphasis on, it's a 4-year program for undergraduates. They come all from school of a time where, selfie is another thing which obsesses. So when we tell them the documentation of your course and project is very must, most of the documentation will see maximum selfie with the work, not the work. So you say that selfie is fine, but many people died taking selfie. But you don't kill your work, what we do is, that's why we try to experiment with disconnect the Wi-Fi when their drawing course is going on, so they don't check on the mobile and draw the human anatomy. We call age-old way of studying a human model, live model. And then here comes the crisis also of a very good mentors. That is another crisis. And as you said, there are many private universities, but there are also many private design schools coming up. And that is creating another pressure, because on the outside, when they go out, immediately there are UI, UX, there are outsourced industries, they're giving big pay package, which is nothing but because they're coming here for cheap labor. So that is another problem. So we are kind of sandwiched. And then many of the kids coming to design education thinking it's a very glamorous subject to study. But it is not necessarily true. It needs, again, equal hard work. So we have collaboration with some of the UK design schools, and they introduced no smartphone in the class. So that is something we are also trying to introduce, but again, create a lot of pressure and attendance issues we face. They don't come to the class. Many of them are awake till 4 o'clock in the morning. I tell them that when Donald Trump goes to bed, you come to the classroom, and by the time class is over. So we go through all this kind of problem, but no matter whatever it is, we have evaluation process. So they get a repeat, or they get repeat again, and third repeat, they have to leave the school. So that we maintain, but it's not easy, because we also get pressure from parents. Because parents, you have to give justification that now there is RTI. As a public institute, we have to answer any bogus accusation. You have to prove your point, or you have to be very careful what you say. So it's always a tightrope walk. But yeah, I mean, this is, again, I have no answer, but we are going through two worlds actually, the best practice of the past and relevance of today, but how you cope with that, yeah.
I think when it comes to games, I think 90% of the games that are available in India are not contextualized to an Indian audience, right? So then, are there movements within the gaming industry to make it more relevant for kids? Because today, I know my own nephew knows more Greek gods than Hindu gods. Like if I ask him who is the god of the wind, he'll probably look at me and say something like Zeus or something. So it's a reality we're living in, where because the access that they have to is largely about Western culture, there's very little relevance to Indian culture. So what is the industry doing for that?
So there's an entire subsection of the gaming industry in India that is dedicated to making games for, in quotes, the Indian market. Now, this is a very controversial stand within the industry because it assumes that the Indian market is a singular entity. And that's where things begin to get problematic, right? Like, that's a bit of a can of worms because the parallel that has always been historically drawn is the China market, right? We've got 1 billion people and we create something and it's mass consumed over there. I worked on an interesting project making content for Indian consumers, and some of our findings were truly that there is no singular definition of an Indian consumer, right? And that's where it becomes problematic to localize by going beyond just translation and making things accessible in Indian languages, because the aesthetic, the context of every different part of India is so diverse that it's impossible to find a one-size-fits-all solution. In fact, where we made the effort to really go hyper-local, to use a bit of a buzzword, when we really contextualize something to, let's say, Kannada culture or Tamil culture or Telugu culture, it was vastly successful. But anything that had this approach of, one fits all, like let's assume that Bollywood appeals to all Indians, that just did not work. And that's where it's problematic. It's not for the want of initiative or enthusiasm to make things accessible to Indians. It's just that the scale of the problem is so massive and it requires very specialized solutions. I don't think it's easy to implement.
I think the last question that I'm going to put to the panel, and after that we're going to open it up to discussions, is a question that we all have when it comes to ethics. And I think this translates completely differently into 3 scenarios. I think when I'm talking to Professor Chandan Gowda, I'm talking about ethics in terms of who holds these opinions, who has the right to these opinions, who can be these opinion makers. Yesterday when we were discussing, you said, like in the West, when someone needs an expert opinion, they know who to go to. Whereas in India, we're still not sure about those things. A cricketer could give you an opinion on eco-conservatism, which is the place we are today. Like I've actually seen an article in the Sunday Herald where someone asked Virat Kohli about eco-conservationism, and I was just like, why is he being asked about this? Like, when did he become an expert? But that's the reality of India today. We don't seem to know where these experts lie. Of course, there's the other question about who are we to decide who the experts are, but it's a contentious situation, but I would like some clarity on that.
Roman, just to clarify what I said yesterday, it was to say that that a lot of people who have thought about things seriously, but who don't live in metro areas, are not touched by journalists who are looking for quotes or looking for opinions. It's a finite set. And the other point is true. I mean, it's not, India isn't, the newspapers don't have a checklist of, for economic history, 18th century, go to this person. That's another kind of an issue. But that results from a culture that's so hyper-specialized, where, it's all mapped out that way. But the point was truly about diversity. I mean, if you want to know what happened in, in North Karnataka floods, I would go to someone there, but they would, both the national as well as the Kannada news media would come to people. I think that, and it's not just a question of accessing information. It's about understanding the situation better, more responsibly. And I don't see it because it's all, again, led by not just, I mean, the charitable reading is they are on the lookout for a quick bite, but I really think they don't know how to assemble a proper news report. The ethics part was about asymmetries of knowledge availability and what that it does when you want to reach out for an argument, what comes to you readily is something that is not a neutral fact. I mean, it's there because it historically it's come to you easily, and so these are things that one has to. I mean, I deal with it on a daily basis with my colleagues. It's when you want to think about a problem, who's the thinker to go to and why? I think there is a global mainstreaming of dissenting. What counts as dissent against against the caste question or the development question or any of these big questions. I think there is almost a template, a global template. I mean, this is alarming. This is what I feel has resulted of decades of intellectual labor being done in a certain fashion and distributed in a certain fashion, and it's very powerful. It's an arsenal actually, and I think, and it doesn't appear as such. So how does one navigate this? I mean, not at all to suspect the integrity of the conversations that happen in that space, but to note to this fact that they may not be ironic about how limiting and limited that conversation can be. It just
I'm going to change that slightly when I talk to you about gaming. Now, half the world's problems are now being blamed on games. That's just the American narrative that, oh, people are violent because of games, there's more rape because there's games. Everything is now being blamed on video games and games that are available on the phone. As game creators, as content creators, how huge is the ethics question? Where do you draw lines? I'm sure in India it's a very different ballgame altogether. We're not having those kind of games being produced in India, at least as far as I know. But where do you all draw the lines? How do you build your code of ethics? And personally for you, where do you decide where I will not let this product go?
I think sensitivity is really the key when we look at how to build a code of ethics for any new game, right? Regardless of the game's context, we are very, very wary of stereotyping identities, of stereotyping genders. There's a lot of pressure to do this, incidentally, because the numbers will always show that if you put the girl in a pink dress, then all the kids are going to identify with her. But as creators, we kind of stand up against that and we say, I want her, I want her in jeans, I want her in overalls. So I really think it comes from having a strong sense of ethics yourself as a creative team. And keep in mind that gaming decisions, while there might be people leading a group of people, it is also up to the team to be equally on board with this ethical sensibility, right? A lot of the games that I've created have been created for an American audience. And we take a special, care to have a viewpoint, but not to be offensive with it. And we do not caricature people. And this is, these are things on the games I've worked on. Different games have a totally different standpoint, and that's fine for them. But this is how we've always looked at games. I do think somewhat relevant, but a bit tangential to what Professor Gowda was saying, the template for the creative process also exists in this space, right? So a lot of the time, younger members of creative teams, when they just come on board especially, do not want to do their due diligence and do not really want to question the ramifications of the decisions they're making, even if they're as simple as, is our lead character a boy or a girl in this context, right? And it's up to, I really think, people with a lot more experience and organizations themselves to kind of push for this level of thought to go into the process itself, because it's a lot easier to just follow, hey, we need this, this, and this, and just plug and play. I think people need to kind of step back and really look at the ramifications of what they're creating.
I'm going to frame that question slightly differently to you again. Now, when we're talking about the art that's being created, putting it in the context of something like an app like Snapchat, a lot of young people are on Snapchat, are busy clicking nude selfies of themselves and sharing it with people, assuming that this is going to disappear in 24 hours and is wiped off the face of the earth. But that's not necessarily the case. When it comes to art being created also, I think the present generation is dealing with that kind of a thing, saying that everything has a time frame and it doesn't exist forever because everything is digitized, which is not the case, because almost everything that is being created on a digital platform is being recorded and archived at some place. And I said, it's just one legislation away for us to access that information. So in a world like that, how difficult it is then for you to ensure your students produce art or design or things that are ethical in that sense?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, definitely. I mean, it's more increasingly we're facing this challenge because what's happening with the popularity of studying design, many of tutorials started. So these tutorials are giving formula that once upon a time how it was for joint entrance and all, the Agarwal classes and all. Similarly, it's happening in design. So they're going to these tutorials. The tutorials study that what kind of work happen in these design schools, especially in NID model. And they're giving good money to some of the ex-NID graduates or someone who is familiar with as a trainer or teacher in the tutorial. So students are coming with similar portfolio, and sometimes they may get through, and that become their advertisement for the tutorials, saying this year this many students from our tutorial got through into NID. So their numbers are sometimes goes up because of certain situation, I don't know what, but when they come, those students refuse to open up because they come with a set of portfolio, and they know that if I somehow manage to sail through, I will get a job showing the same portfolio, because market also look for certain kind of skill set. But what's happening, the purpose of National Institute of Design is not like that. We are a multidisciplinary institute, predominantly work with craft sector, textile, local product, interventions, design research, design and design ethics. So, and contributing to the local economy. So that value-based design education, we are every day facing this problem, because the desire to post even half-cooked drawing, and those drawings are also drawn from internet. It's like tracing. It's not your own drawing. It never evolve. Neither you're going to library to read a book, but you're copying from those illustration manuals. So these things are there, you know, and become more. So we are going through it. We are not yet sure that how we are going to deal with that, because on the other side, many of our dedicated faculties are not documented. Sometimes we lament saying that their classrooms should be recorded and converted as a textbook. So that also didn't happen. So one professor retired and goes the whole legacy. So we are in a kind of a crossroads situation that way. So I again have no answer for this. Yeah.
So I think we're at a position where we've realized that we know that there are problems. There are no real solutions that we have. No, this panel cannot offer solutions to these issues. But let's, again, to put ourselves in a context of how serious the situation is. 4 days ago, there was a newspaper, and I'm not taking names, but a newspaper in Bangalore published an online report of proceedings in a court before the judgment was actually pronounced, and they used the name of the person who was, the person in the case. They used the name of the person, the father's name, and their actual house address, and called him a criminal. And eventually, to their bad luck, the judge pronounced it exactly opposite, but they published the story 1 day before the judgment was pronounced. And so now that person is taking them to court. But the big joke here is, for a fluke of whatever was happening, they did not publish this in the print version, and they published this only on the online version. And today, that article has disappeared online. There is no archiving of that article also available. So that's the world we live in, where you can make mistakes and it will disappear. At least disappear in the sense of what we're calling disappearing. It's obviously there, and I'm sure we can move the courts to get that article out because it's archived somewhere. But we live in a world where most people are irresponsible about the kind of work they do. So keeping that in context, and what we've discussed over the last hour, I'm thinking, any questions from the audience to anyone on the panel?
Do we have online training for the digital narratives, for us training? And how far it will complement for creative writing, this digital narrative? And is it opposed to traditional narrative or complementary? I want me to enlighten, please. Online training.
No, I don't think we have, I'm afraid. There is no online. We don't encourage online training because it needs more offline interaction.
Were you specifically asking about news writing?
I'm a creative writer.
Okay.
I want to use it as for a complement for my...
As far as I know, whether it's... There is something?
There are apps.
There are apps, but there's no
Seminar
institution.
And, there's no institution. There are apps, and there are also writing forum online training sessions going on.
There are also
Because
programs on Coursera and
all that,
Udemy and all of that.
For my writing career, how far this will help me?
I think you can talk to her after the conversation. She can put you in touch with some websites. But I must tell you that to be wary of that, this is again a lot of ideas from the West. We don't have anything very contextually Indian. As far as I know, no. But I'm sure you can talk to ma'am and after this, and they can give you some inputs on that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I was thinking about the idea of digital narratives, and for me, there were two things that were very clear, which I think needs to be classified. One is the digital medium as an instrument, right? The instrumentality of it, whether it's for communication or transferring files, or whether it's for accessing papers in the US. So I think that's an instrumentality, and I think when we talk about ethics of instrumentality, it's the same as whether it's a surgeon's knife or a killer's knife, and the ethical debates are the same. But what I'm interested in is the archiving nature of the retelling. Are digital narratives original? Are they just retelling things in such a way that they remove away something away from the original? Going back to what Neeta said about the music, or if there's a yakshagana, the phenomenology of watching a yakshagana live performance versus somebody recording it and watching it because they were not able to go. So there's a kind of a double-edged sword. I would love to watch the YouTube video of something that's happening in m.i.l.a.p, but not just being here, remove something. And I'm wondering whether the people who are experiencing the digital, as you said, a visual medium, the screen is a very important part, and I think the screening is actually a retelling, and it's not a telling. And therefore, I think somewhere where the pixel art is a telling, the screen art is basically a retelling. And I think if you would like to think about what it means, sir, to you then, to see the cartoon, which is on a print, being made into a cinematographic cartoon, not shown to us, but continuously available for streaming on a media. So I'm just wondering, what is the nature of the ethics of that kind of retelling? Or do we even have direct digital narratives?
I don't know, it's always retelling, I believe. Like Rashomon effect, if we take from film studies, that my story get distorted and become a gossip and continues. So and whatever platform it goes through, but it's in human nature, I think it's always retelling, like, you know. So I really don't know. I mean, it's today there is a digital medium. After the internet holocaust, again we can go back to maybe oral narrative. Yeah. So
I'm wondering whether the digital consumes the other art forms. It eats up the music, it eats up the dance, it eats up.
I think it's left to the people who are creating these retellings in that sense. Like, for example, I'd like to give you this beautiful example. There was, I don't remember the names, but you can check this online. There's this very famous photographer, a Malayali gentleman, who had shot his 10 years of experience of Mattancherry town in Kochi. And it was just a normal, it just went around the country, and it was a beautiful photo exhibition. A bunch of students from some institute in Bangalore saw it and said, "You've not done justice to what you could have done." So they got in touch with the artist and they said, "Tell us your story and we'll go and convert it into video for you." And then with the artist, they built this beautiful 10-minute video of the whole history of Mattancherry using his pictures as resources. And because they involved the artist in it, even though it was a retelling, in many ways he himself agreed it was fuller than his original exhibition. So it really depends on who's doing the retelling and how conscious, as she was saying, it depends on how conscious you are as a creator, the amount of effort you put into being true to that narrative. It doesn't answer your question, but I'm saying that's a possibility that could arise. That creators take that ethical judgment to say that when I'm retelling this story, I do full justice to it and I give you as much of an experience of the original telling that I can. That could be a great future.
And another point here, I just want to bring, there is a trend which we largely object, that cultural misappropriation, like taking any tribal art form and making a film in that medium. It's suddenly you get an award in the West and become very famous in the country, but you don't belong to that community. So that question also comes there. And we strongly object among the students saying, don't copy any art form if you don't belong to that community. Then you take the urban contemporary form, which is, even if you copy from internet, it's fine, but it should not be you copying Gond or Santhal or Madhubani or whatever. Yeah.
I think that ties into what Chandan talked about, situated knowledges and inequities of the retellings. Yeah. You have any?
Good afternoon, sir. I'm Hitesh. I'm a second year student of m.i.l.a.p. Department of Languages. I have a question for Professor Chandan. As you mentioned, the use of digitalization in the manipulative methods of political propagandas. Do you think that the use of art and its form were always in the use of manipulation of manipulative methods of political propaganda? As we can just take an example of like futurism. In that also, it was something similar. What we can see nowadays with the like the trolls and the memes, what's happening. So, what's your view on that?
I mean, what is propaganda and what is not is a difficult question. It truly is difficult in the sense it need not always be political propaganda, right? Art in the service of truth is what we usually see it as. But the futurism that you talk about was a small movement that tried to do art that had nothing to do with the past, isn't it? And it was a short-lived art movement. I'm not sure how that connects with this question, but the fake news, I mean, how is it different from, let's say, Soviet propaganda or even American capitalist propaganda that we saw before? The forms in which it operates and the sources of distribution and a willed attempt at trying to pervert thinking about the world. There is, I think we need much more time. I think they can't be the same. The fake news is not the same as what you had before the onset of social media.
I think it's a very large conversation. You should probably get in touch with Professor and right after this over tea and have a really proper conversation. It's tough to explain this really short. I think the last question we have is from Sir in front here. Yeah.
There's a wonderful, lively panel and masterly way in which you conducted. So it's heartening to see this kind of conversation taking place here. I thought, thinking along with you, I thought a couple of issues probably that need to be brought into the conversation. One is that after all, digital medium is just one of the communication media. And historically speaking, every communication medium which it changed, it developed these anxieties. Anxieties about a new communication system, divide about whether you have or have not. These have occurred across all communication media from Plato's time to contemporary times. Okay, but the problem is that every communication medium has a limitation of its own, a limit of its own. I'll give you one anecdote. There are these two major philosophers. One of the leading contemporary media philosopher called Bernard Stiegler. He had a conversation with Derrida, and then this was about television. They were having discussion about that. And flatly, when a question about Heidegger was asked, Derrida clearly says, this is not the medium, that is, television is not the medium through which conversation about Heidegger can take place. So every communication medium has a limitation. Now coming to the question of the digital, we use the word in the most vulgar way, knowledge, in the digital medium. That is, anything that is convertible into zeros and ones is knowledge. But we have a different noble understanding of the word knowledge. I think Chandan's inputs come from that direction. Throughout I noticed that knowledge is something which is more enduring, which you kind of build on over a long period of time, and that lasts for centuries and probably millennia. That's the sense of knowledge that we have. I don't think there is a parity between these two notions of knowledge, which the digital medium does not pay attention to at all. I'm not saying this is negative. I'm just trying to clarify the issue. Now the question that comes is that when you take into the account the limit of the communication medium itself, the question that comes to us is that, is it possible through the digital medium to bring forth something that is enduring, especially a medium which is most, I think, outrageously advanced to distract you? Can a medium of distraction, fundamentally a medium of distraction, you all were giving the examples. I mean, one of your tests of endurance is ask the student to sit quietly for several hours, and you see that everybody disappears. So digital medium is considered to be the most absolutely distractive medium, banning the cell phones in the classrooms, etc. So is it possible to think about a born digital, which is going to be most enduring?
In ways of seeing, Venkat, I mean, David Lynch, someone whom I like, he himself has said, none of us, David Lynch, the film director, he says, I know that the possibilities are much more than we've ever known with the camera that we've had all these years, but I still don't know how, maybe in the realm of seeing, in the realm of, exploring the dimensionality of reality, there may be some lasting changes. I don't know. Since you asked for one example, I feel something here might be truly, a contribution of a certain kind of digital camera that is doing things that the previous camera wasn't doing. And that might come to inform changes in the way we perceive.
Also, the next monster is that 360-degree experience.
Which is already now on
which is like, we are really curious about it, that what nightmare or dream it will bring. So it's continuous. So I don't know. Like, I was attending one virtual reality conference, and I was hoping to meet my grandmother wearing those VR glasses. So, but they're very costly. Yeah.
I'm so happy you asked that question. Absolutely, and I think the answer to that, while there is no specific answer, is we've had thousands of years with traditional media. That
is the answer. In other words, absorption, right?
True.
Distraction is absorption.
But there is a lot of hope when it comes from digital creators. Nobody's ever stopping and saying, let's stop with this. They're trying to make it more immersive, more immersive. As you said, we're talking about 360 now. Tomorrow we could be talking about also including the element of touch and all kinds of things. So in terms of creators of these experiences, they're not stopping themselves. No creator is saying, let's stop at this, or this is perfect. And in that way, I see a lot of hope. I don't know if anyone else here feels the same way, but I feel very hopeful about the future, because I think, unlike the traditional medium, when it came to writing and print and text, there was a full stop. It ended at one experience. But when it comes to digital, there's always this hope of, let's make it better. Let's try and make it better than it already was. Okay, on that note, we're going to end this panel discussion. Thank you so much for your questions and listening to us so patiently. I'd really like to thank each of the panelists for beautiful, beautiful views. It was a pleasure having this panel with you. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll call it a wrap. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I think all of us would agree that was a very complex discussion, and an enlightening one at that. So thank you for sharing your views, your familiarity and engagements with the digital age. So as a token of our appreciation, we would like to present a little something to you. So I'll begin with Romal. I'm sure you're waiting for a nice tea break, so please move ahead. We want you back in about 20 minutes if that's possible.